Good morning. I guess I'll start and explain my long-term history in the Navy. I graduated from the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill in 1940 as a pre-med, and the world was just blowing up in Europe, and I figured it wasn't time to go to medical school. So I went into the Navy, and I was sent to midshipman school at Northwestern University, and became an ensign, called 90-Day Wonders. And then I was sent down to Coronado, the amphibious training base, and I was there for a good 6 months, 7 months, and we trained at the amphibious training base, and we all also trained at Camp Pendleton and Camp Elliott with Marines, because most of our tour in the Navy will be involved with Marines. And I was in the Navy, retired in 1946, and decided it's time to go back to medical school. And I entered the University of California Medical School at Berkeley, graduated, had a busy practice in California for many years, and then during the Vietnam War, I was recruited vigorously, and I came back in as a captain in the medical corps. And they said, you know, where would you like to go? Which sort of shook me up after being an ensign for a long time. And they sent me to Bremerton. I was there for a while, Bremerton Naval Hospital, and then I was sent to Sandpoint. And there I stayed for 10 years. Anyhow, I was a director of clinical services at the Naval Clinic there, and made a lot of great friends who I still have. I retired in '84. Which is a little unusual when I went in the Navy in the early 40s. And we had such a good time that though there was a mandatory 62-year-old retirement, they decided we'd stay together until I was 65, at which time I finally left the Navy. And I guess the main point of being at Sandpoint was the great friendships I made, which still are active today. It was a wonderful place to be. Very pleasant place to be, and everybody seemed to enjoy it and have a good time. Yeah, I had really many good friends, but I'll always remember once I was finished at the clinic and I swam every day, and I came out, it was snowing like heck, and I came and I found I had a flat tire, and I'm looking at it, and some little captain came up who I'd never seen before, and he said, "Are you having trouble?" And I said, "Yeah, I have a flat tire." Well, he took off his hat and coat. It was snowing. He took my old tire off, took it off, and replaced it with my spare, and that's how I met Philip Passantino, and we remained real good friends until he passed away last year. Oh, I recall all of them, the clinic was there, and the Admiral's quarters were right next door. And we had tennis courts in the hangar, which I used. And it was just a beautiful base. And I remember at that time, the Hell's Angels, the Blue Angels used to fly out from Sandpoint. And we had seats on the base, and they'd fly out from there, and they'd come to the hospital a couple of days before and say, "Hey, now, what would happen if we have an accident?" I said, "Well, I'll get in the car and I'll leave the base because it's going to be a mess." And they arranged to have a couple of corpsmen out on a boat, and we had 2 ambulances, and we had maybe 50 people watching the exhibition, which was a little nervous, but it was fun. And then they stopped using Sandpoint as a base, the Blue Angels. But other than that, it was as I say, I'm 95, but being at Sandpoint was a great part of my life. I remember a very funny incident. I had an old English sheepdog, and one Sunday I took 2 of my sons and we went look at the little sailboats, and we were walking down the pier, and I stopped and said, "There's a nice looking boat." And all of a sudden I heard a splash. My old English sheepdog walked right off the end of the pier into the lake. She didn't see very well. Her hair was in her eyes, and it took 2 of us to pull a wet old sheepdog out of the lake. But it was all fun and games. Then I spent a short time as senior officer in ADAC in their had a very nice hospital there, and that was an interesting experience. But I was happy to come back to Sandpoint. Oh yeah, I remember I retired on the base, and they had the band and all the facilities, and it was reviewing the troops, and it was very, very nice. And I remember Christmas time when the corpsmen used to walk through all 4 stories of the clinic singing carols. It was very touching. Well, being captain, I didn't get called very often to the clinic, and my evenings were free. My weekends were fairly free, but they'd call me if something unusual happened, and I got a call one night. There was a body on the bottom of the pool, in our swimming pool, which was open for enlisted people and anybody, and retirees. And they called me, and there was a body on the bottom of the pool with just a pair of trunks on and no identification. And I called poor Ron here, and I said, I explained, and I said, we can do it here, or we can call the city. He said, by all means, call the city, which I did. But the only way we could find out who this body belonged to was, I said, everybody go to the lockers and get your clothes on. The locker that remains locked will most likely be his, and that was the case. We opened the locker and we found he was retired, and never did find out. They thought maybe he dove into the pool and flexed his neck too bad, but he was dead. And I'd be called only for rapes and for deaths and for odd incidents like that. Well, we were trained as amphibious forces. Our job was to take troops into beaches where we weren't wanted. And when the ship was underway, I was a regular ship's officer, and I was a surface warfare officer. When we hit the beach, I became a boat officer, and we put all our landing craft. We carried, I think 26 landing craft, LCVPs, and would load troops into each of the landing craft and line them up and take them into the beach. And it was kind of exciting. And all the time I was in the Navy, I said, gee, this is exciting. I'm never going to do this again. I'm going back to medical school as soon as I get out. But it was interesting. We went to Iwo Jima, we went to Saipan, Guam. We took troops into the Philippines, Lingayen, Subic Bay, Manila. We took CBs in Okinawa. And we went through all this, and at Okinawa, the landing was nothing, but the kamikazes really were terrible, and they knocked our axle off a little bit, and we went back to Everett to have it repaired. And I'd come down to Seattle in a little red trolley car, and I fell in love with it when they said, where do you want to go? When I got commissioned back into the Navy, I said, Seattle. But we've been through all this, 4 invasions, and the war was almost over, and boy, we were laying back, and all of a sudden we got orders. You're going to pick up the 5th Marines at Hilo, and you're going to take the initial troops into Japan, the very first troops into the invasion of Japan. And made us sort of shook up, but well, we did what we were told to do. And we were halfway there with the 5th Marines, and I was sitting in the wardroom, and one of my shipmates came down and said, oh, they dropped a big bomb. And I said, how big can a bomb be? We had no idea of atomic energy. I said, great. And then the next day came, they dropped another big bomb, and I said, gee, maybe something's happening here. We're sitting in the wardroom listening to the Japanese music. And by God, the war ended, but we went into Sasebo and Kyushu. We were the first troops in, and we spent a lot of time with the Japanese, and they were tough fighters. We went in loaded for beer. We went in with all our 30 caliber machine guns loaded, and there were a few naval officers that come on in, and we went in, and all the women and children were hiding in the hills because we thought we'd come in and rape and pillage, which we never did. But that was the end. Then the war was over, and one more trip we went back to the Philippines and brought up occupation troops into Japan, and then headed for home. Quite thrilling to come under the Golden Gate Bridge, fire boats with water, and that was the end, but it was great. And they sent me down to Long Beach. I'm Californian, and I taught small boat handling, and I stayed there. I was a lieutenant, and I had nothing else to do. And I stayed until medical school started in September, and then I retired. And that was it.